For more than a century, people believed Africa's colonial era was over. But today, China is building railways. America is investing billions. Russia is expanding its security partnerships. The Gulf states are investing in strategic ports. And every major power wants access to Africa's critical minerals. So, is history repeating itself? Or is something completely different happening? By the end of this documentary, you will understand why Africa has become one of the world's most important geopolitical arenas, and why this competition is fundamentally different from the colonial scramble of the 19th century. In the late 19th century, the expanding factories of the Industrial Revolution fueled a massive global demand for raw materials like rubber, copper, gold, cotton, and palm oil. To secure these resources, European powers convened the historic Berlin Conference of 1884 and 1885. Without a single African leader or representative present, foreign diplomats drew arbitrary lines across maps, carving the continent into dozens of artificial colonies. These borders cut directly through established pre-colonial kingdoms, local ethnic communities, distinct language groups, and ancient trade networks. On the ground, extractive colonial administrations built transport infrastructure optimized exclusively to move wealth out of the continent. Railways ran in straight lines from interior mines and agricultural zones directly to coastal seaports, bypassing local population centers to ship raw goods to Europe as fast as possible. This spatial design left a lasting legacy of structural export dependence and severe institutional strain that persisted long after independence. While these arbitrary lines contributed to post-colonial friction, they were one factor in later political instability rather than its sole cause. Ultimately, this first scramble operated under a clear, defining logic: direct territorial conquest, political annexation, and absolute physical control. Today, the global race for advanced technology drives geopolitical interest. Modern systems, from electric vehicle batteries and renewable energy grids to semiconductors, digital networks, and defense hardware, depend on a select group of critical minerals. Africa holds a massive share of these resources, concentrated in specific nations. The Democratic Republic of the Congo produces cobalt. Zambia supplies copper, and Zimbabwe holds lithium. Namibia provides uranium, South Africa dominates platinum group metals, and Guinea leads in bauxite. While advanced technology demand raises the strategic value of these materials, the continent is far more than a simple commodity story. With a median age of 20, this is the world's youngest and fastest urbanizing population. Megacities like Lagos and Nairobi expand by over 3% annually, driving massive digital growth and consumer markets that vary sharply from nation to nation. Yet the ultimate value of these economies depends on how goods move. The continent sits adjacent to the world's most exposed maritime choke points, including the Suez Canal, the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, and the Cape of Good Hope. Disruption here immediately spikes transit times, insurance premiums, and global supply chain costs. Because of this, controlling ports, rail links, and telecom networks offers immense power. This forces a key question: is it enough to own the resources in the ground, or must outside powers control the transport corridors that bring them to the global market? In the early 2000s, China rapidly accelerated its engagement across the continent, transforming itself into Africa's largest bilateral lender, trading partner, and infrastructure contractor. This massive footprint spans paved highways, deep-water harbors, aviation hubs, and power generation systems, often coordinated under the Global Belt and Road Initiative. The operational model relies on a recurring pattern. State-backed entities like the Export-Import Bank of China extend multi-billion-dollar buyer credit loans to African governments, with the explicit condition that Chinese engineering firms construct and deliver the infrastructure. The 750-kilometer Addis Ababa to Djibouti railway anchors this model. Financed by a $3.2 billion Chinese loan, it cut landlocked Ethiopia's freight transit times to the Red Sea from 3 days to under 12 hours. Similarly, Phase 1 of Kenya's standard gauge railway, connecting Mombasa to Nairobi, was backed by over $3 billion in Chinese loans, reducing cargo transit times to 12 hours. These massive projects yield both benefits and sharp critiques. Proponents point to rapid construction speeds, expanded transport efficiency, and boosted commerce. Critics highlight rising debt sustainability risks, lack of financial transparency, limited local hiring, and thin domestic value capture. While some observers label this debt trap diplomacy, many international economists dispute this characterization, arguing that debt distress varies on a case-by-case basis. But on the ground, African actors are not passive partners. Governments are actively negotiating better bargaining terms and demanding renegotiations. Kenya has successfully sought to restructure its railway debt, while Ethiopia secured agreements requiring that local workers make up a substantial portion of the rail network's long-term operational workforce, showing how African nations leverage alternative partnerships to assert their own economic sovereignty. Washington and Brussels are counterbalancing Chinese influence by deploying their own financial toolkits. Through the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation and Europe's €300 billion global gateway, Western powers target critical minerals, green energy, and infrastructure. These are commercial alternatives, not acts of charity, built on strict governance standards. Yet African trade analysts warn of conditionality overload. While Senegal aligned with European standards to expand market entry, Ghana in April 2026 rejected a $109 million U.S. aid package over sovereign data privacy disputes. Where Western ties strain, Russia offers a security-first partnership. Moscow supplied 40% of Africa's imported weapons between 2018 and 2022, deploying private military organizations like the Wagner Group to secure mineral concessions in exchange for combat support. While security analysts note these forces can rapidly stabilize fragile states facing insurgencies, civil society activists in the Central African Republic report severe local costs. Local observers emphasize that while Russian forces protected mining regions from rebel attacks, the operations also brought forced labor and extrajudicial violence. Beyond the major powers, the Middle East and Asia are expanding their footprints. The United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia are securing maritime and agricultural corridors, highlighted by DP World's 51% stake in Somaliland's Berbera port. Simultaneously, Turkey exports military platforms and builds key infrastructure, while India uses its pharmaceutical industry, IT hubs, and diaspora networks to deepen economic ties. These overlapping interests allow African governments to engage several outside actors at once. In response, regional bodies like the African Union are using the Continental Free Trade Area to coordinate these diverse partnerships and protect sovereign interests. African governments are not passive prizes to be won or divided. Instead, sovereign states are actively negotiating contracts, selecting foreign partners, and diversifying their alliances. By playing rival superpowers against one another, many administrations secure better financial terms. Yet, this competition only creates opportunity. It does not guarantee success. The actual benefits of these deals depend heavily on local institutional capacity. Countries with strong administrative oversight, transparent budgets, and strict environmental regulations protect their national interests far better than those facing fiscal distress or weak governance. This bargaining power varies sharply across the continent. To build collective strength, the African Union coordinates regional diplomacy, economic integration, and peace initiatives, aiming to turn individual negotiations into a unified continental strategy. The African Continental Free Trade Area, or AfCFTA, aims to dismantle internal trade barriers and integrate regional supply chains. Instead of shipping raw cobalt, lithium, copper, and bauxite to foreign ports, this trade pact pushes member states to build their own refining, processing, and component manufacturing facilities. Retaining these operations on the continent can expand regional electricity grids, create new industrial jobs, and transfer technical skills across borders. However, these massive industrial opportunities carry real risks. ranging from unsustainable sovereign debt and corrupt contracting to severe environmental damage and geopolitical over-reliance. Foreign investment provides the starting point. Ultimately, the design of domestic policies and the strength of local institutions will decide whether this incoming capital builds long-term development or merely updates the old extractive patterns. Today, African nations are rewriting the rules of global engagement, turning competition into domestic leverage. Next, we travel to the far north, where melting ice is turning the Arctic into the next great geopolitical frontier. Subscribe for more deep dives into global power.